I don't think people understand how violent Mississippi was. Terrorism led black people to the obvious conclusion. If they try and vote, they're messing with white folks' business, and they can get hurt or killed.
I didn't dream for a minute that people would be killed. But it was always in the back of everybody's mind that bad things were going to happen. So it was terrifying. But if you cared about this country and you cared about democracy, then you had to go down.
I had been making drawings for corporations and colleges, and my wife, June, felt very deeply about the injustice in the country, as did I. So we decided that I would take my skills as an illustrator and go to Mississippi.
I'm a junior at Queens College majoring in anthropology. My schooling so far has been oriented toward history, and I have a good knowledge of current affairs. Finally, I have a good deal of experience with racial and religious prejudices in the North and South. Andrew Goodman.
That a clip from the new PBS documentary, Freedom Summer. It airs tonight on American Experience on PBS. Well, Monday marked the 50th anniversary of the historic movement that helped change the political playing field in Mississippi and in many ways the country. Students from across the nation, they headed to Mississippi to fight for change. The push for equality was a violent one. Michael Schwerner, a native of Pelham, New York in Westchester County and a graduate of Pelham Memorial High School, he was killed while investigating a church burning along with two others. He set out to investigate with James Earl Cheney and Andrew Goodman. All three men went missing and their bodies later found buried beneath a dam. Last week, I spoke with filmmaker Stanley Nelson about the tragic killings and other events that took place during the effort. Obviously, this story has national, if not international, appeal to it, but there's a local connection to our viewerships. And before we talked about the film, talk about the connection to a Michael Schwerner. Talk about him and a Pelham native. He obviously one of the infamous names attached to that tragedy.
Yeah, well, Michael Schwerner was, Mickey Schwerner was a New Yorker who had gone down to Mississippi to help organize Freedom Summer, and then went back to Oxford, Ohio for the training, along with Andrew Goodman, who was also from New York, and African-American native Mississippian, James Cheney, who went back down to Mississippi early. They went down a day before the actual volunteers were going down because a church had been bombed, and they went down to investigate, and they immediately disappeared. And through that whole summer, people were searching for their bodies, searching for them, and it kind of cast this shadow over the whole summer because they were missing. And finally, in August, their bodies were found, and they had been murdered.
I'm curious, what did you learn differently in putting together this film than even the prior works associated with that you've done before?
I mean, I learned so much. I learned about what Mississippi was like, which I think is incredible. And most people who see this film will learn something new. That Mississippi was, even in terms of the South, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi was a special case. Mississippi was a real police state. The police departments in Mississippi were ruled by the Ku Klux Klan. So I think you learn so much. I think also in this film, in the last third of the film or so, we talk about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and their challenge at the convention in 1964. So Mississippi sends an alternate delegation, which is organized by Freedom Summer, of an integrated delegation to the Democratic National Convention to challenge the all-white delegation from Mississippi. And it's just an incredible story. They have a great case. They have they get a high-powered Washington lawyer to volunteer to be their attorney. Martin Luther King speaks in their behalf. Rita Schwerner, whose husband was murdered, speaks in their behalf. And one of the great heroes of the civil rights movement that most people don't know about, Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a native African-American Mississippian who was a sharecropper and had been thrown off her land for trying to register to vote. She's like the cleanup hitter. But one of the things that is just amazing about this whole story is Lyndon Johnson is working behind the scenes to stop them, to stop their challenge. And what's so enlightening for me and so many other people, I think, will be that Lyndon Johnson recorded his phone calls. So you hear, you know, how politics works. You hear Lyndon Johnson trying to work behind the scenes to shut down the challenge from the African Americans from Mississippi. And you hear Lyndon Johnson on the phone saying, do whatever you can do, but don't bring my name into it. You know, don't let anybody know that I'm part of this.
You know, also as it relates to history, I think sometimes we conflate things, and I think the idea of the Freedom Riders and the summer volunteers were the same thing, but they weren't. The Freedom Riders had an idea of what they were walking into, but I think in the film you'll show that a lot of college kids, these Freedom Summer volunteers, had no idea what they were walking into. And obviously the movement started well before '64, but that summer that's the focus of this film, it's not one homogeneous population. You got different groups with, I guess, different expectations.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that happened in Freedom Summer was that the idea was to invite, you know, 700 to 1,000 college students, mainly white college students, down to Mississippi to kind of jumpstart the civil rights movement in Mississippi, because up until that point, it was thought by most of the people working in the civil rights movement that you have to kind of avoid Mississippi. You know, we'll work our way up to Mississippi, but we're not ready in 1964 to kind of take on Mississippi, because Mississippi is too violent. But certain groups, this Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, said no. You know, we've got to go into Mississippi, and we've got to go in now, because, you know, we're in the right. And we're not going to dance around Mississippi. We're going to challenge Mississippi head on. And that will bring the publicity and the attention to Mississippi that will hopefully negate the violence.
Stanley, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Again, the documentary titled Freedom Summer, it airs tonight at 9 p.m. on PBS. We'll be right back to wrap things up.